we know Starlink officially blocked in Cameroon, can't operate with a license. What is your take on this?
I mean, when you have a government that shuts down internet for a year in part of Cameroon, when you have a government that believes that internet connection is a new tax, okay, you talk to the highest ranking officials of the government and you tell them, okay, I'll send you the document by email, they give you a Yahoo email. Tolerance is what is happening with Yango, because these people come from they work on the software that was put in place in the 50s. I need to sign every document of every taxi in Cameroon. Where does this one come from? You know, and so I stop it immediately. I am the boss. And as the story goes, the outrage did not happen on the street. It happened in his own office because most of his workers were using that service as well. Could you explain to me why it is so difficult for young entrepreneurs to obtain seed or bridge capital in this country when our banks are overflooded with deposits? Rather than talking to you guys and saying, okay, you're a group of angel investors, these are 200 billion, show us what you can do. Okay, and that's the move Obasanjo did in Nigeria with the creative industry. And that is what, when you're a visionary leader, that is what you have to do. Today, we will meet Steve, with whom we'll have an open talk on his aspirations and challenges as a young entrepreneur in Douala, Cameroon.
My name is Steve TCHOUMBA. I'm the Executive Director of Active Spaces. I also sit on the board of AfriLabs and the board of CAN, Cameroon Angels Network. I am an entrepreneur and passionate about African and Cameroon's development. That's me. C'est pour ça que j'ai un bureau debout. Dans mon bureau. Ça aide à...
Garder les gens éveillés? Non.
Non, ça fait deux choses pour moi.
Tu pourrais aussi mettre du café, hein, ça ferait la même chose.
Non, non. Le café même c'est un autre problème. Ça fait deux problèmes. Ça résout deux problèmes pour moi. La première problématique, c'est que quand les gens viennent, ils restent pas longtemps. Et quand quelqu'un vient, c'est pas confortable. Donc tu es debout. Nous sommes debout. Donc quand tu viens, c'est correct et tu pars. Ça c'est une chose. Et deux, ça me permet de faire mes pas de la journée. Donc quand j'ai fini mon sport, il faut que j'aime bien atteindre 10 000 pas, 15 000. Donc ça fait que je reste debout et je reste aussi éveillé. Et bon, moi je suis hyper tendu maintenant depuis quelques temps. Quand j'ai arrêté de prendre le café.
Ah bon?
J'ai arrêté.
Alors que c'est pas fond. En fait, on m'a toujours dit que c'était pas mauvais.
C'est pas plus mauvais que ça si tu prends une tasse ou deux. C'est pas plus mauvais. Mais j'ai tellement abusé sur les pre-workouts. Je prenais tellement les pre-workouts que je pense que ça avait un effet. Donc depuis 2 mois que j'ai arrêté de prendre du café, ma tension tous les matins est vraiment, c'est normal. Donc ça pour moi ça va. Et puis ça va si je peux me passer de café, ça va.
D'accord, c'est bien. Moi aussi. Hein, donc, je parlais du café par rapport à garder les gens debout pour qu'ils restent éveillés.
Non, je veux pas qu'ils restent trop longtemps parce que quand on est confortable dans le canapé, et là, la chaise, on tape les commentaires, on dit là, même ce qu'on ne devait pas dire. Mais quand tu vas rester debout,
non, tu raccourcis.
Tu raccoursis, tu restes.
C'est un bon plan.
C'est un bon plan.
Surtout quand tu as des gens qui viennent te voir pour prendre l'argent. Bon, si les gens viennent te voir pour payer, c'est pas un bon plan.
Non, effectivement. Si c'est vous payer, il faut qu'ils s'asseyent, que vous discutez, vous prenez le café, effectivement.
Donc on a commencé. D'accord. Ok. On avait dit quelle langue?
Anglais, English?
English.
We'll do English. We'll do English.
That's fine. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So let's have. So there are a few things that I want to ask you first, and then which can lead into some of my challenges, my questioning around Cameroon. One is, you became an elected official in 2013. So you must have been in your...
Well, I'd been elected before that, but in Douala 1, yeah.
In Douala 1. So before that, tell me more.
In the southwest.
How old were you then?
Pardon?
How old were you then?
Much younger.
much younger.
Yeah.
And that to me is part of the question. So the work that I do in Cameroon is really much related to young people. So a lot of questions around it. So when I was thinking about this, one of the things I think was, okay, elected official quite young. I'm curious to your experience. I'm curious to the leading class of Cameroon that are not so very young anymore. And to me personally, I have a problem with it. We can't have a population that is, 80% under the age of like 35, and we have leaders that are, for the majority, over 50. So what is your take on that?
Well, I think the first thing I can say is by design. We moved on to multi-party politics in 1990, and in so doing, the youth was or is definitely a threat for those in power. So they were obliged to design the entire democracy in such a way that it is not attractive to the young people, and that is why you have limitations. For instance, age limitations. You cannot be an MP below 23, for instance. There is absolutely no reason why you could go to prison at 18 and you need to wait 5 more years to be an MP, and many such things. Secondly, when I say by design, we have an electoral system in place that for most positions is the winner take all through the list system, making it such that even when you have young people on a list, they are far below. It's very complicated to have young people on the list above, because the higher you are on a list, as for instance in municipal elections for Douala, one where we are, it's 41 councillors, and generally those who carry the list are at the top, either politically or financially, and those who put in their energy are at the bottom. That is unfortunately how the system. So since we have a proportional election, it's only probably half of that list that goes through, and so generally it cuts off the women and the younger people. So that's why I'm saying it's by design. Now you have to understand through that there is a big problem, and it's my biggest challenge as a leader of a political party to find young people. It's a huge challenge. Today, when you look at the figures that the last compilation of Elecam dated 31st of December 2024, you can see that about 60% of the young Cameroonians aged between 20 or even 19, because you can get registered at 19, and because if you will be 20 in October, you're allowed to register right now. But if I cut it at 20, between 20 and 35, about 60% of the potential population of that age bracket is not registered. That's a huge problem. So sometimes I talk to young people and they tell me you need to bring down the voting age. I say, look at the statistics. If you look at 2018, you look at 2011, you look at 2020, you will see that 80% of the voters are above 35. So let's already do everything possible to get the 20-35s to vote, and then we start fighting to bring down the voting age to 18 as well. But if those between 20 and 35 don't seem to be interested by what's going on in Cameroon politically, so why should we be fighting for those even younger? That's another problem. Now you have an additional challenge, which is that we are a poor country, and generally politics is one of the ingredients in politics is money. You need it's something that costs. Fortunately for us, it costs a bit less in Cameroon than it does in the Western world, but it's an expensive issue, and the wealth pyramid in Cameroon is such that the younger the population bracket, the poorer they are. So it's it also helps to understand why the elderly, let's call them that way, are all over in politics. But I feel it in the National Assembly. Not later than a couple of months ago, I'm at 55. I was told that I'm much too young to seize the floor the way I seize it, because I have to respect the elders.
Yeah.
And so you realize that if at 55 you're an age challenge to a big part or even the majority of that parliament, then there is a fundamental problem. And you're absolutely right. Those in elective positions do not, it's not a mirror image of our society, but it doesn't just, it's not only the age, you have everything that comes into it. You have gender, you have socio-political composition, and so the party I represent has been fighting since 35 years to try to do everything possible to change the voting system, to make sure that minorities, as well as, not just tribal minorities, but including dispositions to make sure that the elderly, the young, the women, the handicapped, and all these groups find a safe haven in the electoral dispositions for them to get through. One of the ways that works is to bring down the proportional dispositions, to make sure that if, for instance, if a political party or a list at an election gets right up to, say, 3% in a council area, so that council, that list can go through, and once, part of that list can go through, and once that list goes through, to see into it that the final composition of the council reflects the reality of that council area, not just the list. Because what is happening today is that the list would have to reflect the council area. But let me take an example of a council that has 4 communities. Let us make it simple. So they will request each list to have representatives of those 4 communities, each list to have representatives of the gender, and each list probably to have representatives of the age groups. But if all the 4 lists have representatives of Group A that are on the top of the list, and Group C, Group B, C, and D at the bottom, and the young at the bottom, and the women at the bottom, at the end of the day, that city council will be made up of only representatives of community A and probably only elderly men. And that's a problem, and that's an issue. And there is no disposition in the law to prohibit that from happening, because that is why today we have councils where there are no women, because the lists were cut in such a way that the women being at the bottom never came in.
Okay. You said something, and I want to stop there for a minute. Respecting elders.
Mm-hmm.
We have an African culture that is really ingrained in that kind of of belief. Do you think we should respect elders even if they're wrong?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I absolutely don't, and I think that the respect of elders should not be an institutional challenge. It should be something that is natural in the society, just as you need to respect women, you need to respect everybody. That respect needs to be natural, but it shouldn't impose itself on institutional dispositions.
Okay. So
it is not because your mayor is young that it should be a challenge, or it's not because your mayor is elderly that you shouldn't be allowed to challenge him as a mayor. As a mayor, he's a mayor. He can be a mayor between the ages of 23 and 100, and so you challenge the mayor, not the person age. And the age. Yeah.
It's funny. My first job in Cameroon, I was a manager, a director at an international school. I took up that job when I was 28, and so I was director of an international school. And I remember obviously recruiting people that are much older than me. And I remember in one particular incident, I was talking to the staff and I said, you know what, if there's an issue in the school, police comes, they're not going to ask who's the oldest here. They're going to ask who is in charge here.
Exactly.
And who's made the mess, or who do we talk to about this?
Yeah.
So it's an issue for me. I have a particular problem when I think about this. I think about our cultures. I'll come back to the issue of youth in a minute, but just to address this in terms of, I have a particular issue with, let's just say, some of our traditions, where we say, no, you have to respect your kings. And when I see
your chiefs,
and when I see what your chiefs are doing, thinking, in what way are they respecting, safeguarding our tradition? In no way. But do I still respect them? For somebody who perhaps does not even have the culture, who perhaps grew up in Europe, and perhaps wants to be African, wants to learn the African culture, wants to partake in the African cultures, but sees their elderly, their chiefs, behaving in such a way that is perhaps, from what your understanding of what African culture is, it's not representative at all. Do I still respect the institutions or the person? I mean, what would you do? What would you say to that?
Well, I think, first of all, it's a very important and very sensitive topic. The first thing, you talked about kings. You don't have kings in a republic. You have a king in a kingdom. And if you have a king, it means that he's above the president of the republic, which makes it such that it's unavoidably, you need to call it a different entity.
Else, yeah.
And that's why you see in France, they call Monaco a principauté, because they are part of France, and so they cannot be a kingdom. And that's very important, because that's where the problem starts. When you have a representative of the republic calling a chief Sa Majesté, you already have a problem with everything that will follow thereafter, because you're giving a position of protocol to the chief that is not supposed to be his. And I am a chief, and I say that I fight all the time in my community to tell them, I am your servant, I am your chief, I am not your king, I am not your majesty. And it's a difficult fight, but I think where we stand today, the two things. The first thing is that we have a government that has a huge issue of legitimacy, and through the years they use the traditional authorities to cement that lack of legitimacy, if you understand what I mean. They needed these traditional authorities to be a relay in order to control these communities.
Do they have a place in the social context?
The chiefs?
Yes.
Yes, they do.
And what would that be? What would that be?
Well, they are in some instances, like in the north, the Lamidos, they are spiritual leaders. They are religious leaders. That's what they are. And they are in charge of, nearly all over Cameroon, they are in charge of the first level of justice. So they have a judicial power as well, with what you call in English the customary courts, where they can already sort out issues. It is actually a very modern system of arbitration. Because in a customary court, both parties agree on the ruling that will come out of that court before they get into it. So it's a very modern way of doing it at the local level. So it's something extremely important for our communities, for that to go on. Many issues, social issues, are being harnessed by the fact that the traditional rulers have those powers. And we have a fundamental issue in Cameroon, which is that of land. And we are in a no man's zone a bit since 1974. And fundamentally, we all understand that land ownership is to a large extent community-based. We know where the land of this tribe ends and where the land of that other tribe starts. And since land ownership is always around a dispute, the place where that dispute is resolved today, at least at the first level, is at the level of the traditional leadership. So it's a very important institution because it helps where it works. Now in various places, unfortunately, it reflects our society. This institution has become corrupt as well and has lived out of its purpose and so on and so forth. And so you have conflicts between this leadership and their communities. But for all these communities and wherever it works, it's a very important institution because it helps solve lots of problems, so societal problems at the base.
So on a personal level though, how do you reconcile being a chief, being an entrepreneur, and hopefully being an innovator? Because some of our traditional, some of our traditions are quite, aligned with a 21st century world. So how do you align those two?
Well, it is always a question of perception. Just as I talked about, many people will tell you that the customary courts are something of the past. And I will tell you that it's one of the most innovative institutions that our communities put in place 500 years ago, because it's what you call arbitration. And people are going towards arbitration today. So it always depends on how you perceive these traditions and how you are able to make them evolve, because it's not about dogmas. Okay, you need to be able to have the entire community evolve with these traditions to make sure that not that those traditions get adapted to the realities of today, but inside that community you need to adapt the realities of today to those traditions. There is, for instance, a very painful situation today in the Southwest and Northwest, and in my community, the current war going on. It's extremely sad what is going on there. But people don't understand. People who do not come from those places do not understand the extent to which families are being torn apart. And as a chief, I face a fundamental issue, for instance, with the fact that some people's will, especially patriarchs, are not being respected because it is just, for instance, we are just unable in the current circumstances to go and bury them in the village. And when one part of the family or friends brave the odds to say he or she said she will be buried in the village and will go there, what happens is that you have just 4 or 5 people going for the burial, and very often even the children and even the widow, in some cases that I know, are unable to be part of the burial. And so this is heartbreaking. And that is where you have to show a sense of leadership and to talk to your people. Okay, and to say, well, yes, we have a tradition of taking home the remains of our patriarchs. We have a tradition on how we bury people. But when all of that was put in place and when we agreed to all of that, there was no war. Yeah. So, but you need a lot of diplomacy and a lot of persuasion to get people to that level. And I can tell you, that's my biggest challenge today.
Diplomacy or communication or conversations.
But that's exactly, so you're coming to what I was saying. So when you adapt your language, okay, you now see that the tradition doesn't take you backward, it guides you. Okay. And the way you present it and the way you talk about it, whether it's a glass half full or half empty, the perception is quite different. But the end game, why is it that people are so attached to where they get buried? It comes from a very simple predisposition, it is marking your soil. Okay, so that nobody else seizes your soil tomorrow, and your children need to come back to where their origins are. And the only way they come back is if their parents are buried there. Because if they're not buried there, they don't come back again. And so the community loses that land or loses that space. And so that's the challenge. So you need to work on all of this, and you need to look at other ways of getting there. And those challenges today in the 21st century are no longer what they used to be in the 19th century and the 20th century. So you need to put that on the table as well, so that you can adapt it. You don't need to change the tradition, but you need to get people around to adapt themselves to those, based on the living standards in the 21st century, to adapt themselves to those challenges. To those traditions.
I know the economy of death in Cameroon is a massive.
Well, it depends where.
It's a massive business, but
it depends where.
Let me come back to the issue that we started this conversation with around youth. So a lot of your answers were geared towards government institution, but I want to talk about private sector. Why do we not have the top CEOs that are under 30? Why do we not have why is not, well, I mean, I understand, and I hear public sector is failing in that regards, but what is the private sector doing? And why are we not recruiting putting young people in leadership position in the private sector, regardless of what the...
Well, you just mentioned the challenges you had at 28 when you were director of an international school. And I can tell you that I had the same challenges as well at that age, and even younger, and that was not in Cameroon, it was in Europe. So I can tell you that it's a challenge worldwide. The thing actually is that you need to put in, and again, I can only talk from my own point of view and where I'm going to. You need to put in, I would say, proper regulations to make sure that this type of a conversation doesn't become necessary tomorrow. For women to be where they are in countries like Germany, legislation was enacted. It didn't happen because the German men love the women. It's because they cannot do otherwise. Today, if you see in Cameroon, there is no legislation on gender. And when I talk about gender, youth is a gender. Okay? There is no legislation that of affirmative action for gender. It doesn't exist. It exists on minimas. It is not legislation that pushes even the private sector to get somewhere. So for instance, in Scandinavian countries, in some of the Scandinavian countries, in Germany and so on, you have minimas in boards of directors. You cannot have an all-male board of director, which is common in Cameroon, but you cannot have that elsewhere. You cannot, and you need to, in Cameroon, we fought in Parliament during the 9th legislature, we fought to bring in dispositions into the finance law to make sure that companies, and it was finally brought in, to make sure that companies who recruit young people below 25, and now I think they've gone up to 30, we didn't quite like it, but that's it. You need to do some compromises. Young people below the age of 30, used to be 25, recruited in a company, would reduce the tax burden of that company if you recruit more than 5, I think, or a percentage of the total. It's a very good incitement that is present in the law. It's still present today, but you need to do more. First of all, people don't know about it, and secondly, when they recruit those 5 to 10 young people, generally they're drivers and delivery guys, and they're not directors. So you need to do a bit more, and you can only do it through legislation. You cannot do it by goodwill. It doesn't happen that way.
Are you seriously saying? What I'm hearing is, can we only lead from the center? Can we only change from politics, from legislation? Can change, is that the only way change happens?
Well, that's the way you guarantee that something is being done, or at least has to be done. Okay, that's the way you guarantee.
So you're saying you can't rely on people's goodwill and people's willingness to want things to be better?
Once you regulate, before the electoral code came in place, And before the first jurisprudence in 1996 it was, nobody ever thought of having a woman on an electoral list. And there were lots of electoral lists, probably 60%, I don't know the amount, that had no women on it. Then suddenly a law came in and said we need at least one woman. No, the law says we need to reflect the the sociological composition of the community. Okay? And the jurisprudence of Dipanda Mwele came out and said to reflect that in terms of gender, you can have just one woman and then you reflect. Can you believe that? Because we were of the opinion that you need, if we have 52% women, to reflect that at least you need that to be somewhere around 50%. But no, he said just one woman. And guess what happened? When that jurisprudence came, all the lists came down. The number of women on the list came down to minimus. Then the electoral code came up and they said each list, for the first time, each list for legislative elections, on each list you need to have at least one woman. What happened? Overnight we had 53 women in parliament. Okay, so if you have a jurisprudence today that says that all the lists of the party just need one woman, the next legislature you'll probably have 5 women in parliament. So the goodwill alone doesn't make it. You need to have strong rules that are respected to make sure that all of that is taken care of. Otherwise it doesn't happen on its own.
No, it makes perfect sense. I'm part of an international entrepreneurs competition. A couple of years ago there was a move to have a special women's prize. And what it did was women could apply, even if they were only applying, because if you say entrepreneurs apply, obviously they're like, it doesn't concern me. But the moment you say, oh, there's a special women's prize, they will apply. What ended up happening was more women applying for the competition and not just winning the women's prize, winning the overall competition.
Of course, but you see, you changed the rule. And you gave a prize for women and for women to apply, and that's what pushed everything up. That's what I'm saying. You need to legislate. You're talking about young people, okay? Our current law tells us, the land tenure law tells us that you cannot do a direct registration of land if you are below 50. 50.
If you're not born under 60 or something in 1960?
1974.
Okay.
Okay, so that's 50. Okay, so how can you have young entrepreneurs if one of the factors of production and one of the most important factors of production is land? How can you get entrepreneurs below the age of 50? It just doesn't work. I was shocked some years back. My son put up a company. He was building drones, selling drones, and he wanted to pass from the informal to the formal sector. So he did all the documentation, and then he went to the bank to open an account because he had a client who had to pay. So the client told him, we can only pay you through a bank account. Okay, so I said, you go to my bank, go and see this guy and talk to them and open up an account. Shouldn't be a big deal. He came back in the evening and told me he couldn't. Why? He was too young. And that's why I discovered that you have a minimum age to open a bank account in Cameroon. Can you believe that? And so on and so forth. So that's why I'm saying that if you do not legislate, or if you do not, how can I say, correct the wrong legislation, you cannot address those issues, because those issues are embedded. So that's it. Today, when you look at women entrepreneurs, why are they so few? Because the legislation doesn't allow them to freely do that, because they have barriers on heritage, they have barriers on land ownership, they have so many obstacles they have to overcome that makes it extremely difficult for them to be on peer with you if they try to open up a company. And so those are the things that have to be addressed, and those are the things that have to be addressed in a very intelligent way to make sure that everybody is on the same level and we can move on.
I seem to be hearing a lot, and I understand why, a kind of top-bottom approach. Consider this, a bottom-up approach. There is a challenge there, and that will bring us back to perhaps education. You went to a public school, right?
Public and private. Public and confessional, I did both.
Oh, you did both?
Yeah.
Do you have different experiences of both?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
What were the experiences?
Well, it's difficult to say because the public was primary and the confessional was the rest. So
okay.
Yeah. So it's difficult to compare. Yeah.
Okay.
But they're two completely different experiences.
Okay, yeah. But as somebody who went to a public primary school, looking back, would you think that you got the service that you think at that age you needed?
Well, unfortunately, there was no other choice. There was just one other school that was for the cream of the elites, called PNEU or something like that, and then there was the public school. So you could not compare.
I mean, okay. I mean, the question for me is...
So everybody I know of my age went through the same system.
Okay.
You see, so when there is no inequality, you do not quarrel about the service you receive because everybody received the same service.
But let's compare that to what you received to what your kid received.
Yeah.
If they were in a public school today. Let's compare that.
It will be different. I think, in a public school today, you would receive much less.
Okay.
I am concerned about the quality of education in general in Cameroon because I'm concerned already by the curriculum where we stand today, and I'm even concerned by the orientation bill on education, which to my liking is very far from where our educational system should be in 2024. So I have a general problem with that needs to be addressed. I have a problem with the school book list. I have a problem with lots of issues. I have a problem with the way our teachers are being treated in the public sector. I have all those issues put together make it such that I have a global issue with where education is right now.
So if you're with me, the reason why I'm considering a bottom-up approach is because I think maybe in my work on my daily basis, I work with entrepreneurs. I help entrepreneurs grow their businesses. And one of the challenge for me was, I run an incubator, a hub in Cameroon. And as hubs, we're trying to catch up problems or trying to catch up things that should have been addressed, primary school, secondary school, and perhaps even university level. And from the work that I do, if we are to build very strong, successful entrepreneurs, we build character, we build innovation, we build. I heard you in one of your annual speech talk about resilience. We'll come to that, but you build resilience. But a kind of resilience that is actually adapted. We can debate on this, but the Cameroonian resilience, I think there's a subject there that kind of elusive. But those are the kind of skills that you want to build. And I think if eventually we really want to have a bottom-up approach, because to me, I'll be honest with you, a top-to-bottom approach in this country, to me, is very unlikely. But we need to be in favor of a bottom-up approach, right? But in order for that to take place, we need to train and educate people and give them the right mentality.
So we're saying the same thing, because that's again a top to bottom approach.
In order to educate, you need the legislation. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. You cannot wake up tomorrow morning. For instance, I don't understand why our educational calendar is what it is today.
I agree.
Okay, but I mean, you cannot open up a school and say your long holidays are in December. They'll close you down tomorrow morning. So you need to be able to have a national discussion on this, and a national discussion, a national conversation that's called Parliament. And so it needs to go there and come out as a law. So you need to have more people like you in Parliament tomorrow who are like-minded, who think like you, who can say, let's stop this thing. Why do we have all these problems? Because we have an issue with our nursery schools, we have an issue with our primary schools, and let's address that. That's the role of Parliament. That's why I say you need to, then how now this is enacted is an issue of motivation and every other thing that
let
follows.
let me take a concrete example of what I mean by bottom-up approach. So my first job in Cameroon is running an international school, setting up an international school. Like you, my first issue was the annual calendar. We cannot break in May to come back in September.
When you come back in September.
When you come back in September. That's 3 months of kids being at home. And if you're a parent that does not have means to have private tutors, your kid is 3 months without formal education.
I fully agree.
So what I did was, instead of aligning myself to a Cameroonian national curriculum, I aligned myself to the UK curriculum. That meant that I was then therefore able to have a 6-week training with a 1-week break, like it happens everywhere else in the world. That means my summer term, or my holiday, my long holiday term is shorter, right? Let's call it my June term or my June holiday.
Your rainy season holidays are shorter.
Oh yeah, my raining season. I mean, summer.
And your dry season holidays are longer.
Yeah, exactly. So my raining season holiday is shorter, and then that means when we come back in September, kids have had max 2 months or a month and a half.
That was so smart. That was so smart of you, and because I dream of that. But I dream of that at the national level for everybody. So that how can you do that? You cannot go on the streets and start a revolution for that to happen. You simply need to change the rules.
No, I hear you. I do believe, I do agree with you. We need to change from the center. I agree. But whilst we wait for that to happen,
that can happen faster than you think.
Tell me more.
Well, that's the problem. Let's decomplexify political change. Political change is the fastest thing that happens in our lives. If the industrial revolutions have been very slow, the energy revolutions have been very slow, every other thing has been slow, political revolutions have been like that. We just need to agree. Just imagine we go out and we put in place a new parliament, where I am a parliamentarian, you're a parliamentarian, and the majority of that parliament thinks just like you and me.
Well,
the next day, all of that is put in place.
But the reality of this, and you said things, we
are afraid to take the difficult route, but you've never changed the community
let me
through easy changes. So we're going towards an election in October this year. My deepest wish, whatever the outcome, well, my first wish is to win that election, but my deepest wish, whatever the outcome, is that let us have a national conversation around this election on programs, and let these discussions be national. Let's stop talking about things that have no influence on our lives and talk about these issues and how important they are. Just by doing that, we'll be nudging the outcome of that election, and we'll be nudging those who will be in power tomorrow to understand that these issues are fundamental and they are powerful because they are transformative.
Well, you say two things. One, you say, let's agree. The second thing you say, let's have this conversation. The question is, when you say let's us, who's us?
Cameroonians.
How will this happen?
Well, the thing is, it's not an easy task, okay? It's not an easy task creating a conversation, but I am delighted to listen to you. I never suspected that we could have such a conversation one day, which is, in my opinion, a high-level political discussion. And what I'm trying to say is that because of all the difficulties we've been having in this country, because of the challenges, because of the violence, the political violence this country has known for the past 64 years, there are too few Cameroonians who have the courage to come out, to stand out. And not everybody needs to stand out. But we can entertain a discussion that is in our interest. It is not normal that when we go for an election, we don't have a national conversation on education. We don't have a national conversation on health. We don't have a national conversation on our security. We don't have a national conversation on peace. We don't have a national conversation on our economy, on where we want, on labor, on the work of tomorrow. Pardon?
Why don't we start?
That's what we're just doing, and that's why I appreciate this moment. That's what we're doing right now, and I really appreciate, because it's a very important thing. You know, there is one thing that is fundamental in, and I learned very late in my political life, is that I actually learned this outside of Cameroon. I was put on a peace mission between Azerbaijan and Armenia for the Francophonie. And during our discussions with the prime ministers and the foreign affairs ministers and all these guys, I realized how deep the Cameroonian problem was. Because we actually have a country and we don't have a nation. And these guys were fighting a war because they have nations and they're fighting to get a country. Because I asked myself that, we're talking about a couple of hectares that Azerbaijan was taking away from Armenia, or vice versa, according to how you look at the story. And I was asking myself, who the hell in Cameroon will go to war just because a couple of hectares have been taken by the neighbor? You know, I really fundamentally asked myself that question. That's when you realize that we don't have the nation yet. We still have to build that nation. And it's only when you really have that nation that you can effectively address the issues that you were talking about. And that can only happen if we have some degree of political awareness.
You say fixing or building the nation. I have a slightly, and perhaps you will enlighten me on this. Cameroonians are broken. I work with young people that it's almost impossible to motivate to do anything, because they've learned that you can't change anything. They've learned that, comme on dit souvent, c'est comme ça, on va faire comment.
That's part of that work. And that is our responsibility. When I say our responsibility, all of us Cameroonians, or at least those who have the genius to be aware today that that is an issue, that has to be addressed. Because what you are putting on the table right now is not Cameroonians who are broke. It's an absence of national identity. That is all. It is a question of national identity. And national identity is either built through trauma, and I strongly hope that doesn't happen to us, or it is built by
when you say that, it's almost as if you're saying we've not gone through enough traumas. We have.
When I say how does trauma construct a national identity, is that the entity that is traumatized comes strongly together. Actually, one of the reasons, when you talk to anybody, if I talk about you, I guess at the end of the day, you will tell me all your enemies are in Bangante. Okay? But nothing will take you away from going back to Bangante.
Yes.
Okay? So that's that. Why is Bangante has such a strong identity for you? It's because these communities were nation communities before. What we call tribes today, they were nation communities. And our traumas were lived in those political organizations which we call tribes today. Okay? And that is why we fall back to that identity, and that is why that identity is always stronger than the Cameroonian identity. So that's one of the reasons. But now when you need to bring people out of these tribal identities to a national identity, it's a political job, and it goes through education from nursery school upwards. It goes through everything you do. The biggest entertainment, the biggest, the strongest countries on earth, nations on earth, it took them about 100 years to get there. Well, today we have the internet, it can go a bit faster, but we have to start. And one thing that the colons did everything possible not to happen was to start that chantier, to start that work of putting in place a national identity. And guess what? How do you measure a national identity? Or better said, the visible part of a national identity is patriotism. How do you measure that? The best measure is corruption. The more a country is corrupt, the less it has a patriotic elite. Actually, as a matter of fact, the less its inhabitants, and I don't want to call its nationals, inhabitants, are patriotic. Let me tell you one thing. I'm fortunate enough to coordinate the youth advocacy network in Parliament. I've been doing that for a while now. And we're working on educational orientation, because that's a huge issue in Cameroon, and that's a completely different issue. So we decided to hire some university professors and students to conduct an opinion poll with 2,000 last year secondary school students in Yaoundé in public schools. 2,000 of them. Terminal just before the baccalaureate. And very interesting poll. I mean, very interesting what came out. But what blew us off was that one of the questions asked was, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Something like that. 84% of the respondents gave a geographic destination.
And what did you have a mapping of?
We were on educational orientation.
Of course.
So when you see yourself medical doctor, pilot, teacher, doing a thesis,
working somewhere,
father of 20, whatever, chief of my village. 84% gave a geographical destination: Germany, Canada, Nigeria. 84%. And so you ask yourself, why are you breaking your head when all these guys don't even think they will spend their lives here? You understand? So what does that send us back to? It's the question of national identity. That question of national identity is central to most of the issues that we have raised here.
So if you were to put a plan in place in building that national identity, what would be the first steps?
Well, the very first step is to recognize that it's an issue. Okay, because each time you bring up the issue, they bring up the indomitable lions and they quench the issue and everything goes wrong.
Is that the one thing that brings us together?
That's the one thing.
Okay.
That's the one thing. Look, how many Cameroonians tell you that ndolé is a Cameroonian dish? They'll tell you it's a sour dish. And they will tell you that bobolo is a Betty dish and whatever, Fulere is for the northerners and so on. You will have a fight whether Achu is from the northwest or the west. You will have a huge quarrel where Ekwang comes from. Nobody will tell you this is a Cameroonian dish, not even abroad. As a matter of fact, I challenge you to give me, well, probably this is not the right place to do that, but just I'll challenge you to think about one restaurant in Cameroon you can call a Cameroonian restaurant. When I say Cameroonian, meaning that you can eat food from the north, the east, the south, and the west in the same place. Just one. Okay? And that tells it all. That is where we are today. You lived abroad.
Is that a business model that you're telling me that?
You lived abroad. Well, it's a challenging issue.
It's interesting.
It shows where we are.
We cannot. Okay, say tomorrow. I'm opening a restaurant.
Yeah.
And that restaurant is going to do exactly what you do. Would that be like? Would that be liable? Would that be a model that can work in Cameroon?
I believe so. I think so. Let me tell you, when you choose which restaurant to go to, very often you have to choose between bushmeat and fish. You cannot say you're going to one place and I'll eat folere, you will eat achu, and the other guy will eat roasted fish, and the third guy will eat a steak. It's extremely difficult.
So let me just cut you and allow me. Because that brings back a young entrepreneur contacted me a couple of months ago. He's opened a bar somewhere in Douala 5. And for some reason felt very comfortable in telling me that the reason his bar is not working because his Bamileke neighbor who has a bar, everybody drinks there. So my question to him is, are you sure that the only reason they go to that bar is because the owner is Bamileke? I didn't have an answer, but I said to him, you know what, I'm going to come and visit and see your business model and see your business, look at your business, and then I'll be able to tell you if the only reason why the other neighbor is doing better is because they're only drinking at the friends. But it's touching what you're saying, and I want us to explore that deeper.
And I'm certain that that's not the only reason.
Okay, but it's the perception.
What matters is not the perception, it's what he thinks. That's my problem. As long as he's convinced, we have an issue of national identity, because what he's doing is exactly what in other countries bigger communities do. They will tell you, well, nobody comes into my pub in central London because I'm a black owner. Okay, that's exactly what is happening. And that's what we need to break that down. And you know very well that probably some of those black-owned pubs do not function for other reasons. Okay, for various other reasons. But if you believe deep in you that the reason is because my neighbor is Bamileke, as you said, then we have a problem. Whatever the truth is, we have a fundamental issue.
So you say first thing, recognize. What would be the next thing?
Well, the next point is to organize. Well, there are three very good examples of. There is a lot of literature on that. Switzerland is a good example. Canada is another good example. They worked on this, so there is huge literature on this. I mean, it's a vast subject. I cannot just talk about it in 10 minutes, but you need to create that conversation, that national conversation. You need to put in place some experts, anthropologists, and so on, who bring together these issues and try to see what can be pushed ahead. And once these experts, anthropologists, historians, or whatsoever, all those that are necessary for that work, do their work, they need to sell their work to the politicians, who now enact them into regulations and laws, and brought down in the orientation of the education, so that from childhood on up to wherever you go. For instance, one of the fundamental points in building a national identity is equality, is justice. Okay, and so you need to bring those elements. They need to be visible. And for instance, you can enact a law obliging each council area to be accessed by a tarred road. And that's a national challenge. It has nothing to do whether we have the money or not. We are going to do that, and that's what we're going, and this is a time frame we're giving ourselves to get there. Okay? It's just like when you send the Indomitable Lions to win the World Cup or the African Nations Cup, it's a target. We don't care whether we have the money or not, you're getting there. And that's how you build national identity. Okay, and those are the very important elements of that work. And once that work goes down, you have a very important job on visualization. that needs to be done by a completely different batch of people, those who are close to marketing and building up concepts and everything, because that identity needs to be visualized. And it's only when you go through all of that and you build it over time, and that building over time is all over the place. Let me just finish. Maybe on the visual part of it, the Germans came out of a trauma and they had a much easier time to build a national identity, but they build it around strength. Okay? And everything German is about how solid it is. You go up, come down, whether it's a road, a house, a car, a pen, it's how solid it is. Okay? The Swiss, for instance, they decided that since there are 26 different nations coming together, each village must have a train station, whatever it costs. So in Switzerland, they don't care what it costs for a train to leave a village to another every hour, because it's part of the national identity program. So that's what it is. The visualization part of it is that when you say made in Switzerland, you have only quality, and whatever is made in Switzerland, you see a stony mountain. It's called the Matterhorn. It's on every advert. It's an obligation. It's not a choice, because it's the visualization of a national identity. It's the maple leaf and maple syrup in Canada. That's the way you build it up, you know. And Canadians will die for that, and the Germans will die for that, because it's a national identity, and you build it up and you bring the people together. So it's a long process. It can take 20, 30, 40 years, whatever. But you need to start somewhere.
Just very shortly on that topic. Let me try and voice maybe some of the things that I've heard. By building a national identity, I'm no longer sour. What do you say to that?
No, not at all. Not at all.
But that's
not at all.
That's some of the worries.
Every German is still from where he comes from. Even has an accent specific to where he comes from. Let me take you one step further. When you go, we have a huge Cameroonian community in the larger Maryland, DC area. I've been there a couple of times. And I'm actually, each time I'm there, I'm surprised during the summer how many parties are organized. So you'll have a Ghanaian party. I happen to be close to my friends of the NDC. They'll make sure they invite me to their Ghanaian party. Then you have the Ethiopian party. Of course, you get invited too. Then you have the Nigerian party, biggest party in town. And then you have the Bassa party. And then you have the Bangante party. And then you have the Kumba Boys party. And then you have the Tico Girls party. And so on. So that's typical. Okay? And we need to work on that. We need to really correct that. We need to not even correct. We need to say, okay, you can hold your Kumba Boys party, you can hold your Bangante party, you can hold your Sawa party, you can hold your All Bamileke conference. But I mean, guys, when is the Cameroonian party holding? Tell me. I want to be part of it. Okay? Why is there no Cameroonian party? Because of a lack of a deficit of national identity. Okay. And when people sit together, we are naturally Cameroonians when we are abroad, until that is the two of us are Cameroonians for a third party, and we'll argue against that third party until the third party leaves. Then I start asking you, but where are you from? You understand? And we need to kill that. And it is extremely socially, it is costly, economically it is costly, and in terms of national security it is extremely expensive. It is the absence as well of this national identity that permits secessions to breed.
You know what, I hear, but one thing that I think I take from this is visualizing this national identity. I think once you visualize it and you actually express it, and people can say it clearly what it is what we want, I think some of the worries can actually be dealt with. So I take that from that, visualizing that national identity. Now, I mean, two things. I'll finish on entrepreneurship in terms of for my conversations, but so I grew up in the UK, right? And it was not fun and cool to be African back then in the UK. And then the Nigerians happened. And all of a sudden it was cool to be in a club dancing to Nigeria. Nigerian music or wearing Nigerian clothes or whatever. So for me, it's around the role that art and culture plays in actually perhaps even building that national identity.
Of course.
Or perhaps even building our economy.
Of course.
And so my question to you, how do you see this, and what can be put in place to actually let art play its role?
Well, it's good you're talking about this, because you said one thing very interesting. The Nigerian happened. It didn't happen.
Okay.
It was designed.
Okay.
It was invested in. Okay, what happened is not the music you started listening in that club. What happened is that you have an entire political class in Nigeria that decided to get rid of Abacha, put in place a democracy, liberate the space, and allow people to exist. And guess what happened? After 1 year, there was an election. People reconciled with their country. People started putting the Nigerian flag up again, and they identified themselves. Many of those abroad decided to move back. The country that everybody thought was at the verge of collapse became the most vibrant economy in Africa in no time. And because of all that, young people had their space and place because they came in. The first democratically elected president from that era, Olusegun Obasanjo, decided to work with young people and to diversify out of oil. And what did he see? He saw Nollywood. He saw the power of that economy, and he decided to put billions into it. Today, people leave London to register in Abuja in the studios. That's what happens. When your studios are in the backyard of a kitchen, you can never beat them. Okay? So you need to invest. It is a political process. You need to have the right people who are elected into power, who have that vision, and once they have that vision, they put money into it to make sure all of that happens. People just sit down and think it happened overnight. It did not happen overnight. It was a whole political design. It's public policy that was put in place. When they started building Tinubu, everybody everybody thought they were all crazy, they were all mad. But everybody is seeing what Tinapa in Calabar is doing today, where it is. So all of that happened by design. That is why it's very important to understand that what happens to us is what we choose for people to decide. The people we decide, the people we select to decide on our behalf, the choices they make have a direct impact on where we stand. And today, that bet is a winning bet, because I don't have the figures, but I do believe that today arts and culture, the artistic industry in Nigeria is above the oil industry in terms of revenue for the country. When you see what these guys earn, I mean, when you see the record contracts that they sign and so on and so forth, but it came from somewhere. It's not, they don't have more talent than we do. As a matter of fact, we have probably the same talent with much more experience, but it's a whole ecosystem you have to put in place, in which they put a lot of money, billions of dollars, to make sure. And that's why you put on Netflix, you have Nigerian content. You put on anything, YouTube, you have Nigerian content. It comes from something.
Cameroonian content.
We have it too. influenced by Nigeria because they were closest neighbor, and I think one of the God-given gifts of this country is that we share a 1,400 kilometer boundary with Nigeria. So I do hope that all the positive things happening there influence us here too. And it's the country that is closest to Cameroon. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I have to bring us back to a conversation that we already had. And again, it's around this changing happening from the center. And the conversation we're having about investment into the creative industry in Nigeria. So I'm part of a network called the Cameroon Angels Network, right?
The
Cameroon Angels Network. So we are a bunch of so we're a bunch of people that have come together. The Rebecca, the Joels, the Serge, and we've about 20 of us. And what we do, we syndicate our money and we invest in startups, right? And so last year, so to date, we've got about 7 young startups in Cameroon that we've invested our money in. One of these startup is actually a company that is solving a mobility issue, access to motorbikes with security, insurance, and over 1,000 Cameroonians that are into employment, that are making revenue. I do hear the systemic change, but what I'm really curious to know is that whilst we wait, and I say whilst we wait, I that's not what I mean, but perhaps as an opposition leader, there are things that need to be done.
I don't like that term, but go on.
Please correct me.
Well, it's not a permanent position.
Okay. So as a political leader, in the art industry, what is being done? What can be done without any systemic change? Because one of the things that you perhaps don't mention in the Nigerian story, and one of the things that happened in the Nigerian story, is the Nigerian people that were clubbing in London, that had money, that insisted that play my song because I'm spending money in your club. Well, that was the individual.
Let me maybe correct you, and there I'll let my age play on yours. There was no time in history where Nigerian music was unknown. Okay, and as a matter of fact, the real Nigerian billionaires in London were there in the 70s and 80s. Okay, and they were clubbing. And it just didn't happen that they will stop the music for Fela to be played. Okay? The point is, what you have to understand is that because of this investment in the entertainment industry, I'm putting the creative industry, it's part of it. But because of the investment in the entertainment industry, okay, the entire creative industry came one step up. Okay, and we're now on par with what was happening elsewhere in the world. And guess what happened very fast? They even became better. Okay, and so let me tell you, I was recently in Argentina and Colombia, and on radio, in the bars, and wherever you go, it's Nigerian music, full time. And I was even surprised that they came down. I was in one place called Palenque in Colombia where they were playing Prince Nikombarga in a bar. And I had to stop there and ask them, and they said, no, that's
our song.
Yeah, that's it. And that's Cameroonian, by the way. So anyway, just to come back on your points, and it's a very crucial thing, and it's a big misconception of what is happening in the world. The world, and I think when I listened to what happened after the Trump election and so on, most outings were around that point as well. The world only takes the road because somebody or some people before that built the road. Okay, you cannot just drive in the bush. And building that road is legislation. It's all what is around. You call it the center. I don't call it the center. It can be entirely decentralized to respond to your apprehensions. But whatever happens positively, it's because the legislators allowed it to happen and made it happen. And it opens up the way for every other person to follow. Now, could you explain to me your Angels Network?
Yeah.
Could you explain to me why it is so difficult for young entrepreneurs, I'm just talking not even startups, young entrepreneurs, to obtain seed or bridge capital in this country when our banks are overflooded with deposits? Okay, it's something you cannot explain. Can you explain to me why we have so much money in state covers that is put into the budgets to push the economy to go up, but all they do is spending billions on ailing elephants that will never be able to survive, rather than talking to you guys and saying, okay, you're a group of angel investors, these are 200 billion, show us what you can do. Okay, and that's the move Obasanjo did in Nigeria with the creative industry. And that is what, when you're a visionary leader, that is what you have to do. That is where you go to. That is how you make your entire economy move forward, not only from the center, but you need that entire legislation to be able to do it. You cannot do it by goodwill. That's what I'm trying to insist on. No, you need to build the bridges and the roads on which all of this moves, and you need to put the money on the table for it to happen. And we have the means. The Cameroonian budget, the state budget of Cameroon, it will cost us nothing to put 500 billion on the table to kickstart young enterprises to go on. What happens? They put the 105 billion into the youth, whatever they called it, project. What has it done? Nothing. Because they were sending people to villages, go and open cocoa farms, do this, putting a lot of money. Well, what it did, to their credit, is that, and probably that is what they wanted, is to take out a big chunk of the idle youth in the cities and to fix them somewhere with a project, knowing it will never work, but just giving them the minimum for them to try to fight hard to make it work. And after 3 years, when it fails, you, the young man, become the problem and not the project itself, you know. And they did it very well, because there were no riots in towns and so on, and people seemed to be happy. So it worked. But those 105 billion could have been used to create thousands of small startups. Probably half of them would have survived over 5 years and 10% over 10 years, and probably we could have had a unicorn in 20 years or whatsoever. But the point is, you need that vision. And when you're ruled by people, be they in parliament, in government, or at the presidency, whose software was built in the 50s, it's just impossible to get there. And that's why the first step for all of that to happen is for that alternance to exist, for new people to come in who understand that language, who understand that importance, who understand that, because guess what? Those in power in Cameroon today sent all their kids to school as far as possible. What does that tell you about where their mindset is? Is that they come from that post-colonial mindset where being an artist is a failure. Yeah. Being a footballer is a failure. Being an actor is a failure. So how can you ask those people to invest billions in these industries, and they are the industries of today, when deep in their DNA, they grew up understanding that all of those places, all of those spaces,
jobs
and jobs are just for people who have failed. It's just impossible. So that's why I say that is what you need to correct in the first place. When you talk to somebody in power in Yaoundé about what you guys are doing, laudable, when you talk to them about it, the next thing they tell you is that you're right, because I can't use my phone and my granddaughter, who is 4 years, shows me how the phone works. They don't even understand that it's one step above how a phone works, because you can bring out solutions to their daily lives that are much more important than what they do. I mean, when you have a government that shuts down internet for a year in part of Cameroon, when you have a government that does, the first thing they do is to ban Starlink in Cameroon without even asking them how it functions or what they can do, or can you pay tax here or there or whatsoever. When you have a government that believes that internet connection is a new tax, okay, when you have a government that doesn't even have a digital chart, okay, you talk to the highest ranking officials of the government and you tell them, okay, I'll send you the document by email. They give you a Yahoo email. Okay,
so a second,
so you can't use those people to bring about those solutions.
So Starlink, let me stop there for a second. We know Starlink officially blocked in Cameroon, can't operate with a license. Some government officials have stated security as a matter. What is your take on this?
Well, I personally questioned the minister in charge of Post and Telecommunications during the November session, and she told me it's a regulatory issue, and that they have informed Starlink on what they have to do to be able to operate in Cameroon, and they're waiting for Starlink to come back to them. Now, where I have an issue with that is that regulatory tolerance is the norm in Yaoundé and not the exception. So when it becomes an exception, then there is another problem. There's just too many things happening in Cameroon where there is a tolerance.
Why not tolerate that? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. And why not tolerate it while they're coming up with their document? The essential point she raised was that they are not incorporated in Cameroon, and so if they need, and that's where probably the security challenge comes in, if they need to hold them accountable, there is no way they don't know where to meet them. So they need to have a registered office in Cameroon and so on and so forth. She didn't convince me. I guess she didn't convince Parliament either. And I even finished by telling her that, look, I have a Starlink connection, and the problem you have as a minister is that you have banned Starlink, but you do not have the powers to punish those who use it. So there is just no way, because there is no law that allows you to seize Starlink equipment. You have banned Starlink from streaming down onto Cameroon, but you cannot ban me from having a Starlink dish, because that's a whole different issue. And so she laughed.
So tolerance, when you say that, my take on this is I totally agree with you.
Tolerance is what is happening with Yango. There is no legislation on
car sharing, car hailing, carpooling.
Thank you, carpooling and all of that. There is no real legislation on it. That's why the minister at one point wanted to stop it, and he saw the public outrage and he moved back. But he has never withdrawn his document, and there is tolerance. That's what we call administrative tolerance.
So is that how things happen? Public outrage and
well, because once again, because these people come from they work on the software that was put in place in the 50s.
Okay.
So these guys like, I need to sign every document of every taxi in Cameroon. Where does this one come from? You know, and so I stop it immediately. I am the boss. So, but then they see that there is public outrage, and they finally start understanding that there is a service being offered, And as the story goes, the outrage did not happen on the street. It happened in his own office because most of his workers were using that service as well. So, and again, he didn't understand that it wasn't a transport company. It was just, it was more of a software company than a transport company.
So are we ready for technology?
We are not ready for technology with the current government. No, we aren't. That's the problem we have. That's what I'm telling you. And that's why if we want technology, we need to do one thing first. We need to change this government. We cannot be ready for technology when we are power hungry. We cannot be ready for technology when those who are supposed to take decisions and legislate do not understand what technology is. If you come and talk about I organized a workshop in Parliament on artificial intelligence, and
how did that go?
It went surprisingly extremely well.
Okay.
Because the MPs were like, wow. But the wow came from discovery. You know, things that every high school student already knew, for them it was, wow, this can be done.
How are you going to legislate something that you don't know?
That's the point. Okay. So what you do in a normal dispensation is that you change the legislators and you put in legislators who know.
Okay.
And that's why you go for an election to choose the people who share all of that in.
I mean, you said that I want to throw this, but I want to stay on tech for a minute. But the question, well, I want to stay on tech a minute and say, so you're saying we're not ready for technology, and at least
when you say, let me correct you, when you say we, I'm saying this government, the government we have. Cameroon is not ready because of the government we have.
Okay.
Because when you say we, we're saying,
but the people are ready, right? Because one of the things that Yango did you know that
you know, one of the problems in Cameroon is that the Cameroonians are far ahead of their government. Yeah. That's one of the biggest stress factors in politics in Cameroon.
So Yango, you mentioned it. Female Yango drivers in Cameroon, amazing. I think prior to Yango, you would never have seen a female, or at least very few, even if there were taxi drivers in Cameroon that are female drivers. And I think what Yango offers then female drivers, one, I'm safe. As a female working as a taxi driver, I'm safe. There's an application, people that are booking the application, we have information about them, so I'm safe. And I think this is kind of what technology does. It's an enabler. It breaks down barrier.
It goes further. It solves problems that you do not even suspect exist. Because what does a female Yango driver do? It permits probably 20% of the female customers to finally be able to take a taxi.
Safe, yes.
Because not because of safety, because in some Muslim traditions, you do not take a male taxi driver to take you from one place to another if you're a female. Okay, so it solves that issue. When you ask yourself why there is no taxi in Marwa, probably now with Yango you can start having some.
Yeah, definitely. So to come back to the issue of then how do you change? So what is the drive, and perhaps in your political party, to ensure that the next legislators are the people that are young, that understand, and that that understands this issue, and then therefore can legislate better on them?
Well, talking to you, it starts there. But one of the biggest challenges, and just not later than this morning, I was reading Ruben Omniobe, who had the same challenge in the 50s. One of the biggest challenges is exactly that too many people, especially the younger people, believe that politics is somebody else's job. Everything you do is politics. Everything. On your job, your families, your friends, everything you do is politics. And it is rather unfortunate that as a political party, our biggest challenge is to engage young leaders. We give them a premium position in the party. We have always done that. The last time we had parliamentary groups, we always had the youngest MPs, youngest mayors, and so on and so forth. I myself was a very young vice president of the party, and even regional chairperson of the party. But it is extremely difficult to motivate young people like you to tell them that, look, for things to change, we cannot expect people who do not understand it to do it for us. For things to change, we need to take them into our hands. Okay? And let's move on. Take them onto our hands. Let's go into parliament. Let's go into our councils. Let's change things by controlling them. You will never be able to change something you do not control. And if you look at parliament in which I sit, 280 seats, 180 in National Assembly, 100 in the Senate. I have never calculated, but I doubt that the average age is below 70. I strongly doubt. Okay, so that reflects every other thing that happens thereon. I mean, you cannot be happy that a young man has been appointed to a position because that's an appointment. Okay, but the young people can seize, I mean, it's the majority. It's the biggest political party in Cameroon is the youth. And the youth can seize the opportunity of an election to take center stage, not by supporting somebody else, but by they themselves taking center stage. And our party is open to that. Probably other parties are open to that too. And if the majority of parliament is young, even within 10 parties, the youth opinion will be center stage in every legislation that comes out. When you live in a country where you are not allowed to directly register land because you are below 50, I'm not talking 20, I say 50, that tells the whole story. And nobody above 50 will go and change that law. Nobody. It's the young people who have to come and say stop. So we need to understand that as long as we let others decide for us, the whole mess in which we are will continue.
So what would you say to a young person sitting out there and thinking, okay, I hear this, but maybe I don't have the money because politics is money.
Of course.
I don't have the cash. Of course. I don't have the network.
Of course.
What would you say to them?
Well, the various levels in which you can intervene. First of all, you can join the conversation. That doesn't need any money. You can start getting informed because that's one of the biggest issues. The young people tend not to get informed and tend not to follow the political discourse. They feel that it's something done by the elderly, and so it's not our business. They will spend a lot of energy and time on football and whatever, on influencers and so on, but when it comes to what really matters for them, they don't open up. Few of them even understand how it functions, so it already starts there. You need to get informed, inform yourself on how it functions, what the opportunities are, where you can stand, how you can stand, and then you don't need to have the money. What you need to do is to raise the money. Most of these young people, they end up opening churches and they raise a lot of money. They become millionaires and billionaires thereafter. So they have that capacity. What I'm simply saying is that you need to get engaged in one way or the other. Not everybody can be a mayor or an MP, but everybody can be concerned on what is going on in our country and how I can shape it. And you don't need to shape it by being the MP. You can shape it by standing beside somebody, pushing somebody up, or supporting somebody, or even just joining the conversation. and engaging in this conversation and making the conversation interesting, taking it away from what is happening on our media every Sunday that brings our country down. Let's raise it together and let the young people get concerned about what's being discussed. It's very important. And I think that's the first thing I can say. The second thing is that there is nobody else who come and build our country. And everything I am doing today, I'm doing it for my kids. It's no longer for me. And they should understand that when you are 20 years old or 30, you have a slight chance to make your own future better. Because when you get to 40, you start working for your kids. Okay? And so then they shouldn't wait to get to 40 or 50. They should do it now. So that the results, because when you enact legislation, it's 5 years after that you see the results. When you change the school curriculum, it's when those kids start working that you feel the results. It's 20 years later that you can feel those results. When you enact legislation that allows industries to be built, the whole process takes 5-10 years until all those companies are up and working. So it is your juniors who will have jobs in those companies for which you fought today. And probably that's also one of the main problems we have in Cameroon, is that if you see what this government is doing, because they are all of a certain age, they're not interested in long-term planning, in long-term strategies, in long-term projects. They are very interested in very short-term. They're not interested to build a highway between Douala and Yaoundé because that takes 10 years. But they'll be interested to repair roads every now and again because that generates side income and so on and so forth. So that's also one of the issues we have. And only the young people can work on long-term projects because it impacts their lives in 20 years, in 10 years, 15 years. By that time, most of those who in power today will be dead and gone. So, yeah.
There's a British scholar who talks about elite bargaining for success, for prosperity. Can we expect some kind of elite bargaining for prosperity in Cameroon?
Yes, we can. Why not?
Okay.
We could. Well, I mean, the point being, it's very much, it's a discussion that makes a lot of sense in Britain, but makes much less here. Because for that to happen, you need the institutions to function. And for the institutions to function, you don't have strong institutions and strong men. You have strong institutions and the men turn around those institutions and not the other way around. What is happening in Cameroon today is that you have a strong man or strong men and institutions rotate around them. And you even change the institutions to adapt them to these strong men and or women. And so you need to create that environment. And you need to actually understand that you don't build a house without clearing the land and leveling the land and building the foundations and proper foundations. And that's the work we're talking about right now. Okay, so how high that skyriser goes all depends on the foundations we put in place now. And that's actually the conversation I wish for the October elections. Let's get that into that conversation. Let us transform our institutional arrangement to make sure that each and every Cameroonian can make their voice count and can be part of this national journey together. And it's only at that time that what you call elites become inclusive. Because right now what you call elites are extractive. They are people who use other people's money, and those other people come running after them, kneeling down in front of them to get a little bit back. Okay? And that's not what I call an elite. Okay? An elite is an example, and that's not an example.
So I guess what I'm getting out from this conversation is that perhaps the next steps is to start maybe having this national town hall conversations, town hall discussions, regardless of, party politics. But, making sure that we're having real conversations, and perhaps this conversation, not easy conversations, but conversation that needs to be had.
Of course.
So I'm looking forward to...
Okay, I'll go around Cameroon again in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
I did that already. I had the most interesting conversations with young Cameroonians. You will be flabbergasted with all what happened during those town hall meetings with young people. One problem we all have, and probably you more than I do, is that you're geographically located in 1, 2, or 3 places. When you really go around and you talk with the young people, you realize that sometimes the problems that you meet blow your mind and you don't even think of them. I mean, I'm taking one example right now, is that going around Cameroon after 20 or so town hall meetings with minimum 200 young people in, and there were conversations, question and answer sessions, and so on. The number one issue that came out, all over Cameroon, and in some places much more than in others, and when I say much more, it was the only thing on the table, was the civil status. And that's when we realized, and that's when we put up a flag and said there is a problem. Unfortunately, when that happened right after the mayors met and we talked to them and they raised it, and it became, inside 1 month, it became a national discussion. Unfortunately, what then happened is that some people decided to make a lot of money on it and privatize the ID card issuance. But the number one problem of the youth in Cameroon were birth certificates and ID cards. So you actually take off from Douala and you want to have this startup mind conversation, and this guy tells you, well, all what you're saying is just...
I don't have an ID.
I cannot even leave the place. You see where I stand here? I can't go to the other side of town because I'll end up in jail. And the guy tells you that, but you know why I don't have an ID? Because the law says that if I don't have an ID, I go to jail. And guess where I have to go for my ID? To the police station. The first thing they do, they lock me up. So you get very simple answers to complex issues. Complex. Guy tells you a policeman is the guy who locks me up because I don't have an ID, and is the same guy who is supposed to deliver my ID.
Are those simple issues?
Pardon?
ID, is it simple? Is it that simple?
It's a very simple issue if you look at it the way it is. What we have done is that we have complexified the simplest issue that is handled by a state. Now, guess what? Civil status, according to law, is in the hands of the mayor, in the council. That's why you go there for your birth certificate. Okay? For you to have an ID. Now, the process, where do they complexify it? They ask you to go and see the mayor to get an extract of your birth certificate. Once you have that, on the basis of what the mayor gave you, you go to court to have a certificate of nationality. And those are all, for people in Bakassi, you're talking about 60, 70,000 of transport fares to do all of that. So you're already in 120, 30,000.
Which you might not have.
You will definitely not have, because even if you have them, it's not disposable income. It's meant to pay school fee or something else. And you go now to the court, to the magistrate, and get a certificate of nationality. And when you have those two documents, you go to the police station to get your ID card made. Now, if you fall on a corrupt policeman, he will lock you up because you don't have an ID. If it's a nice one, he will start the process. Okay? But in every normal country, the guy who decides on your civil status issues you your ID card. So you just simply go to your mayor and get your ID card and go home. Why do they complexify the whole process? because the policeman cannot do anything outside of what the mayor has decided, and the judge cannot do anything outside of what the mayor has decided. So the mayor is the king. The mayor is the guy deciding. Why do you remove him that competence to give it to civil servants? Bring it back to him. Just simply move the process back to where it is supposed to be and where it is in the rest of the world, and you have solved the solution. You have solved the problem. So that's why I say it's a very simple issue that we have complexified. For instance, we, on the civil status, why do 10 million Cameroonians not have birth certificates? Well, 7.2 million not have birth certificates. Why? Because you have a stupidity in the law that says that you have 3 months to get your birth certificate. Well, they increased it right recently to 3 months. Okay? In most places, when a woman gives birth, if you're not in a city center, the first thing that you run after is not the birth certificate. You run after the survival of the baby. You are distances away from your civil registry center. So by the time it occurs to you, by the time you go through the cultural and traditional process of a newborn and everything, and adaptation at home and everything, the 3 months are over. And guess what? Now you have to go to court, and it becomes a long process. You say, okay, I'll do that tomorrow. You start procrastinating, and at the end of the day, the child is 12, has no birth certificate, cannot go to school, cannot do those. It's a lost child. And we have 7.2 Cameroonians without a birth certificate, 10 million of them without ID cards. And those are people who cannot... I mean, when your startups come to you and they talk, if it's a B2C company, they will talk about a pool of 30 million people. But the truth is, it's a pool of 20 million. Because 10 million are excluded. They cannot have a phone, they cannot have a bank account, they cannot travel, they can do nothing. They cannot work, they cannot have an energy connection, they cannot have a water connection, they cannot build a house, they cannot have a land title, they can do nothing. And as one woman told me, you become a prisoner in your own country, because she is in Mombo, and she tells you that from Mombo to where her birth certificate is, you have about 7 police controls on the way. So just to leave that place to go and do her extract of a birth certificate, she needs to provide enough cash to bribe all those controls on the way, which is not something she's supposed to do, but that's the way she explained it to me. And so she's too scared of it. So it's been 11 years that she's a prisoner there. And she was actually living with her junior brother who passed away, and she couldn't bury him because she was too scared to go up to the west for the burial and come back without ending up in jail. And she lost her documentation in lower 6th, so she could not do her A-levels. So she dropped out of school. She tells you she cannot even rent a house. She needs to get someone with an ID to rent a house for her. There is nothing she can do. So when you go around and you talk to people, you see that the bottom million have issues that can be solved with a serious government. That can be solved, I will not say overnight, but with simple approaches and just a little bit of energy, you sweep all those problems in no time. When I was talking about the birth certificate on 3 months, just increase it to 5 years. Just increase it to 5 years. What is the whole issue about blocking birth certificate issuance in 3 months? What do we gain? Nothing.
Perhaps maybe you think if you do 5 years, it will be 10, it will be 20.
What's the problem if it's 20? Tell me what the problem is.
You end up being where you are. You end up with people that are 15
no, the people,
with no birth certificate.
The people are not doing it because it's closed after 3 months. So you need a whole process in court with a lawyer and what else. So that's what they are avoiding. They don't want to go to court. Okay? So why block it? Why block it? Tell me what we lose if a 10-year-old child, the parents go and say, look, I'm sorry, this child was born 10 years ago. That's the proof I have. That's the hospital slip. That's the neighbor who witnessed the birth and so on. Can I issue his birth certificate? What issue do we have? Because when he goes to court, it's exactly the same thing he does. He does the same thing just in front of magistrates. Instead of doing it in front of a civil register, he does it with magistrates. That's all. And you would solve the problems for 10 million Cameroonians. You will have, for your startups, you will have a new market. And you will end up making a lot of money. You don't know where it came from. It came from one simple legislation that increased the time frame to get a birth certificate. You know, just talking about that, it's maybe a bit long. In the US, there was a deep fall in crime at one point. And the Republicans claimed that
their policy changed.
Their policy has changed it. So some scholars went back to school. And they actually realized that there is one simple thing that happened. It was the abortion right that Clinton passed. Made it such that there were fewer single mothers, and presented the situation that most delinquents, most petty crimes were committed by children who grew up in monoparental homes.
Okay.
And the fact that abortion was finally allowed reduced the number of children who grew up in monoparental homes and reduced the crime rates in America, I think, by about 30%. So you see, somebody takes some legislation somewhere on some issue, and the results 20 years after are just huge. Okay, so I was just bringing that to come back to the power of politics and legislation and regulations and the center, what you call the center. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I would like to thank Steve for the open talk we just had and all his insights on the aspirations and challenges he faces as a young entrepreneur in Cameroon. I learned a lot, and I hope you learned a lot as well. And I'll be able, from this discussion, to have a better view of the challenges and a better view of the solutions we need to put on the table for young entrepreneurs in Cameroon.